Mr. Kandwala, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great honor to be asked to speak to the Roatary Club of Karachi this evening. Among the aims and objects of your association is the promotion of international understanding. And in this aim, it is necessary to first have an understanding of the foreign policy of one's own country and the conduct of its foreign relations. I'm also happy to see distinguished foreign guests here who I'm sure would be interested in knowing from us how we view ourselves in the world. Of course, it is always possible for the rest of the world to see us as we are, but it is important for them also to know why we act the way we do, what is the reason for our policies, for strange twists and turns that we may execute in their judgment, but perfectly rational, logical, and inevitable as far as we ourselves are concerned. And so therefore, I would like to present to you Pakistan's view of the world, in which all nations live and have dealings with one another in trying to live together as good neighbors in accordance with certain principles of international law and morality, which are spelled out in noble language in the Charter of the United Nations. The world is divided into a system of states, each sovereign and independent, master in its own house, free to conduct its foreign relations in any manner it pleases. Up till recently, this freedom, this sovereignty implied the right to go to war. Now, as a result of the experience of wars throughout history, and particularly the First World War and the Second World War, all nations are agreed that sovereignty, the pursuit of sovereignty to the extent of waging war, is a luxury that nations should abandon lest the whole of humanity be destroyed. And therefore the Charter of the United Nations was written in 1945 after the great tragedy of the Second World War, in which over 50 million people throughout the world had died, either directly or indirectly through the causes of the war. And this Charter of the United Nations expresses in the most inspiring and impressive language the longing of all nations and all peoples for peace and security, for conformity, compliance with the rules of international behavior, so that nations may live together on this same planet as civilized neighbors, in the same manner as individuals live together within the state, conforming to the rules of law promulgated by the duly constituted rulers. Now, obviously, I'm speaking to you on a subject of great delicacy and sensitiveness, and therefore I shall have to be very careful in the choice of my words. Sensitiveness of great foreign countries is involved, but if I were really to follow the counsel of caution and wisdom, I should not have been here to speak at all to you today. But I gave a pledge to my friend Mr. K.M. Bashir. Unfortunately, I was not able to keep one engagement because I was summoned elsewhere, and therefore I felt that I had a commitment which I should fulfill. I am suffering under another disadvantage, and that is we, the permanent officials of the government of Pakistan, have before us the example of the monks, the order of monks. I believe the Benedictines had prescribed an oath to all the initiates in their order of obscurity, poverty, and silence. Now, it is true, of course, that I have spoken in international meetings, but that was participation in discussions. I am not used to holding forth to audiences. Nevertheless, I shall try to make myself intelligible to you, and I hope that you do not consider my speech this evening to have been too insipid, because the problems of foreign policy, particularly for a country like Pakistan, are full of gravity. They concern the future existence of this country, the maintenance of its independence, the protection of its security, so that we and our children and generations unborn can live as free men. We have lived under the regime of imperialism for more than 200 years. We had lost our independence. And after a great deal of suffering, by a combination of world circumstances, as a result of the weakening of the colonial powers in two bloody wars, by the birth and genius, dedication of men of destiny who were able to seize advantage of the moment and to create this state of Pakistan, and for all time change the destiny of millions of people of this subcontinent and this region. I refer to the founder of our state, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who is among the great men of history. Now we have this legacy of independence. The foreign policy of the country is concerned with the protection of this legacy, with the perpetuation of the freedom, the well-being and the greatness of Pakistan. The principal object of our foreign policy is security, protection against aggression, against military adventures from hostile neighbors and hostile powers. True among the national objectives is also development, because independence is not an end in itself. Independence is a means to an end, the end being the well-being, prosperity and happiness of the people of Pakistan. So therefore, development is one of the principal objectives of Pakistan. It is also the aim of foreign policy to promote development of Pakistan, to so bring about an arrangement of our relations with foreign countries, that we receive their assistance in material and financial terms. It is a historical truism that no country, unless it is prepared to subject itself to a totalitarian system of government in which human values and human rights are completely subordinated to the interests of the state, no country can develop unaided by its own resources until it can reach a certain stage of development when it is able to generate the necessary capital to equip itself with the technical skills to carry on its development. So therefore, we are quite conscious in the promotion and the execution of our foreign policy of this need of development. The twin needs of security and development are not mutually exclusive. They are complementary. Security also depends on development. But in a country like Pakistan, which is faced with neighbors who are unfriendly, neighbors who have much greater power and resources, where the military ratio between ourselves and our neighbors is to our disadvantage. Therefore, in such a situation, development, no matter how great, cannot furnish the means of our security. It is the aim of foreign policy, therefore, to supplement, to make good the deficiency which a country may have in terms of its own resources for the protection of its independence by the political arrangements and alliances and understandings with other countries, so that in time of need, a country such as ours is threatened, it does not stand alone. It is therefore that we, who are concerned with the conception and the formulation and the execution of the foreign policy of Pakistan, regard our responsibilities as no less great than any other branch of the government of Pakistan. If, therefore, the interests of our development and the interests of our security conflict, we have no hesitation in maintaining that the interests of security must override development. I do not have to seek justification for what is a very self-evident proposition. But lest some of you gentlemen are economists and many of you are captains of industry, you need better authority. Let me recall to you what Adam Smith, the father of economic science, said in the 18th century in his great book, which is a classic, The Wealth of Nations. He said, defense is better than opulence. Defense is for the maintenance of independence and freedom. Without freedom, there can be no opulence. Because if a country comes under the subjection of another country, historically, there are no precedents, no examples to show that that country has prospered. Domination by one country over another is always undertaken with the aim of exploitation, the enrichment of the dominating country at the expense of the impoverishment of the conquered country. We in Asia and Africa do not need to be reminded of this fact of history. The history of imperialism for 200 years is there. We of this generation have made the transition from an era of subjection to an era of independence. We can contrast our state today with the state of our people only 20 years ago when we were not yet independent. So therefore, we consider to be the foremost aim of the foreign policy of Pakistan to protect the security of Pakistan, which is the paramount national interest of the people of Pakistan. It is this pursuit of security that led to Pakistan's membership of certain regional defense arrangements known as the SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty, signed in Manila in 1954, and the CENTO, formerly called the Baghdad Pact, which was signed in 1955. We discovered that on 2 or 3 different occasions, the defense of Pakistan hung by a single thread. Not more than 25 old obsolete tanks stood between us and the armored regiments of our neighboring country. This shattering fact of life made the leaders of our country look around for the means of protection through political and military arrangements so that our armed forces could be reasonably equipped, and though much smaller than the potential aggressor country, would nevertheless be so armed and trained as to constitute at least a deterrent to military adventures. This was the reason for our membership of these military alliances. At the same time, we must state that we shared with these countries a common allegiance to certain spiritual values, to the maintenance of a system of government which would respect human rights, which would not regiment people, which would respect the spiritual heritage of Islam, and therefore we found ourselves in sympathy and affinity with the objectives of those countries with which we entered into alliances. This membership of the CETO and CENTO did bring us sizable military aid, of course not up to our expectations, but nevertheless we were enabled to maintain a posture of deterrence against possible aggression. At the same time, we became the recipients of substantial economic aid, which enabled this country to make a start towards economic development, and as time went by, to set a good pace and momentum towards the development of its infrastructure and the beginnings of an industrial structure which would bring the promise of a better standard of living for our people nearer fulfillment. From what I have said, it will follow that our foreign policy was based on the national interest of the country as conceived and interpreted by the government from the geographical situation of Pakistan, from the history of its relations with its neighbors, from the past heritage of bitterness and suspicion between ourselves and India. Therefore, geopolitical factors such as I have mentioned above shaped our policy. At the same time, during this period, that is the 50s, a great many states of Asia and Africa became independent. They, however, chose to follow a policy of what they called non-alignment, that is to keep themselves aloof from military entanglement with either the Western powers or the communist countries. They felt that their interest lay in keeping out of the Cold War, in not entering into these military arrangements, in not accepting military aid, and trying to secure economic assistance for their development because they were similarly placed as ourselves from the economic point of view, to secure economic assistance from both the countries of the Eastern as well as the Western Bloc. Thus, Pakistan found itself paying the price of its security, which was alienation from the natural family of Asian and African countries to which it belonged. This is one of those choices which we have to face in life. A course of action once adopted brings not only its benefits, its advantages, but it entails its corresponding disadvantages. But on the balance, we considered that as the interests of our security were overriding, we should, if necessary, be prepared to pay the price in terms of estrangement from the Asian African family, in terms of a loss of a certain degree of prestige, a loss of a certain degree of freedom of action and maneuver in international affairs, which would otherwise have belonged to us. We made this choice willingly and for good reason. Where do we find ourselves? This is a dynamic world. The world situation keeps changing constantly. New governments come to power. They reappraise their policies in conformity with what they understand to be the interests of their own countries. And therefore, certain changes in policies of the great powers have also entailed a review of the foreign policies by the government of Pakistan, the traditional policies that we have pursued. We could divide the brief history of our independence into three distinct phases insofar as foreign policy is concerned. From 1947 to 1953, when we had not entered into any military security arrangements, we were free of entangling alliances, but at the same time felt ourselves exposed to threat of aggression. Our security was in danger. From 1954 to 1961, we were members of these pacts and were the recipient, as I have said before, of sizable military aid and substantial economic assistance, which enabled us to derive some comfort in our ability, from our ability to maintain our independence in case of armed attack. And also, we derived a reasonable assurance of economic progress. But the world picture underwent a radical change from 1961 onwards. The great powers who were confronting each other in the posture of gladiators began to realize more realistically that a nuclear war would destroy not only the opponent but the defendant, and therefore began an era of what is called relaxation of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was indeed a welcome development and looked forward to by all peace-loving countries of the world. This great and welcome development, nevertheless, brought certain consequences in its train. This is a good example of how countries like Pakistan, which are not among the superpowers of the world, have to react to events rather than follow policies which can shape or create events. Let me hasten to say that not even the greatest powers in the world have the power to create events according to their choice. They themselves have to react, but inasmuch as their power and their influence which they radiate is great, they are able to shape or to mold these events to a greater degree than those countries which do not have this tremendous gravitational pull on the rest of the world. There came an era in which the United States of America embarked upon a policy of massive economic assistance to India, which gave us cause for concern because, given the state of our relations with India, we viewed with great apprehension the injection of this massive economic aid, which enabled our neighbor to divert its own resources to military armaments. As India began to rearm, we felt that the precarious military balance which we had been able to maintain by means of military assistance from the United States, which I may tell you was entirely defensive and never gave us any offensive capability, this military balance was being accepted by the massive injection of United States economic aid to India. This caused us profound concern. Naturally, if America gave economic assistance to India, it was not for us to object. The aid came from the resources of the United States. It was well-intentioned and well-motivated, but we urged on the United States that aid to both countries, this military balance was being accepted by the massive injection of United States economic aid to India. This caused us profound concern. Naturally, if America gave economic assistance to India, it was not for us to object. The aid came from the resources of the United States. It was well-intentioned and well-motivated, but we urged on the United States that aid to both countries, economic aid to both India and Pakistan, should be made conditional on the settlement of India-Pakistan disputes, or else it would only promote an arms race between the two countries, heightening tension and insecurity and defeating the very purpose for which the aid was given. We were not able to persuade the United States to accept our point of view. Then came an unforeseen event. This is one of the examples of the imponderables in history. How events take place which are not anticipated, not foreseen, and which shake up the world, throwing the policies and throwing us off balance. The Chinese-Indian clash over the border dispute in October 1962. The United States felt that China was the great menace to world peace, that there was an imminent danger of a Chinese takeover of all South and Southeast Asia, and therefore the United States, in pursuance of its policy of the military containment of communism and defense of the free world, was under a moral duty to go to the assistance of India and to extend to it military aid. Our assessment of the situation was different. We were confident that the conflict between India and China was limited to the question of borders, and that the Chinese would not be so unwise as to undertake a military invasion of India, which would inevitably have involved them in a war with the United States, the greatest nuclear power in the world. The Chinese are a people of great patience, farsightedness, and wisdom, and they follow realistic policies, whatever may be their ideological stance or their posture on questions of ideology and doctrine with the Soviet Union. The United States was not able to accept our evaluation of the situation, and therefore followed a policy of massive military assistance to India. This event has compounded the threat to our security because it endangers the military balance, which in a few years could be seriously upset to our disadvantage. Then came another development. The Sino-Soviet conflict deepened, and the relations between China and Soviet Union came almost to an open break. The Soviet leadership decided to give massive military assistance to India. What is the situation that Pakistan has to face? India, a great country, which is 5 times our size, 5 times our population, many years ahead of us in industrial development and in skills, with many times our army, is being armed massively by both the United States and Soviet Union. So therefore, we consider ourselves threatened militarily. Our security is endangered. Consequently, we have to consider in this situation how to redress the balance. The balance cannot be redressed by entering into an arms race, because recourse to such a step is bound to lead to the collapse of the economies of the two countries. And in any case, India, as the larger country, has the greater capacity to bear the burden than ourselves. This is the situation that we face. and hence the developments in our foreign policy. As a first step, we have had to limit our commitments. We need to consolidate all our resources to our own defense. And therefore, if we have responsibilities and commitments far away from our own frontiers, we are perforce compelled to husband our own resources, to concentrate them for our own development. Secondly, we have to try to break out of the circle of political isolation. Only a few years ago, as you are aware, Pakistan had a hostile neighbor in Afghanistan, hostile neighbor in India, hostile neighbor in Soviet Union, and a hostile neighbor in China. Our friends were far away. While we could obtain security from certain neighbors by means of our membership of alliances, we were not able to obtain security and assurance of protection against other neighbors. Our security, therefore, remained exposed on its flanks. The first step that we have taken is to normalize our relations with our neighbors, because the ideal foreign policy is to have good neighborly relations. To this end, we have restored diplomatic relations with Afghanistan. The rupture of diplomatic relations was not one of our making. Nevertheless, we have responded to efforts of His Majesty the Shahi of Iran, and we are happy that our diplomatic relations have been restored. We have proceeded to normalize our relations with the People's Republic of China, beginning with the demarcation of a frontier running along some of the most formidable and highest mountains in the world. The main axis of the Karakoram Mountains has scores of peaks running over 25,000 feet high. And access from our side to the passes on these mountains leading over to the Xinjiang province of China is so difficult that not even pack animals can go. You have to cross rivers and raging torrents thousands of feet below by bridges of ropes. So we consider this boundary agreement with China to be a great positive contribution to peace in Asia, because if there was any conflict with China in those parts arising from undefined borders, as has happened with India, and if we were involved in that conflict, our allies, our Western allies, were obligated to come to our assistance. And there is no terrain in the world which is less favorable for defense than that of the Karakoram mountain region. So therefore we consider that an understanding with the People's Republic of China as regards the border of Xinjiang and the areas of Kashmir and Hunza, which are under our control, is a great contribution to peace, not only between Pakistan and China, but for peace of Asia and the world. This agreement has been followed by other steps for normalization: a trade agreement, an air agreement motivated purely commercially, and recently we have accepted a $60 million loan from the People's Republic of China. In none of these actions have we done anything which is contrary to any of our obligations arising from our defense alliances. We have forged good relations with Indonesia, removed causes of misunderstanding and friction between ourselves and Burma and Ceylon. We have forged closer relations with Iran and Turkey through the Regional Cooperation for Development. So therefore, we have been able, as a result of these steps, to normalize our relations with our neighbors, to reach better political understanding, and also to consolidate our ties with friendly countries. Has resulted in the support of China to the right of the people of Kashmir to decide their future by a plebiscite. We will not conceal from you this fact that this pledge of support by the People's Republic of China has greatly heartened us, and it was most welcome. It has brought the whole problem of Kashmir in a new light to the many nations of Asia and Africa. This support by a communist country has been followed by open support by a neutralist country, that is Indonesia, which has also supported the right of people of Kashmir to self-determination. And we were able to elicit promises of support by a very large number of Asian and African countries through a delegation composed of Kashmiri leaders who visited these two countries, many countries of these two continents earlier this year. So today, we are no longer alone, we are not isolated, we are active members of the Asian African family of nations. Our influence and the respect that we enjoy can be seen from the fact that despite the opposition to the convening of a second Asian African conference by a large number of powerful countries, we were able to sway the Asian African countries to hold this meeting in March. We did not participate in the Cairo Conference of non-aligned countries, but if you read the text of the declaration, all their statements of position are such that they support the position of Pakistan on vital matters, on self-determination, on the need to protect minorities, on the need to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons, on the need to bring about peaceful settlement of disputes through methods of conciliation and arbitration. And even so, to this extent, that the non-aligned conference now has acknowledged that events in the world since 1961, when the first conference of non-aligned countries was held, have so moved as to have changed the meaning and content of non-alignment, and to make it imperative that a new definition, a new content, a new scope, and a new meaning be given to non-alignment, which is to intensify the struggle against imperialism and colonialism in all parts of the world, to promote peaceful coexistence and active collaboration between Asian and African countries for solidarity and for the promotion of the aims of their development, so that the world is no longer divided into two groups of nations, the rich and the poor nations. To all these aims, we subscribe unreservedly. And I make bold to say that even had Pakistan participated in that conference, the results could not have been better as far as we are concerned. This shows that the diplomatic steps that we took before this conference was held in bringing to the knowledge of the heads of states of leading Asian African countries our views on important developments, on non-alignment, on the great burning problems of the world, have been received, have fallen on receptive ground, and we have been able to elicit a great measure of sympathy and understanding, which is reflected in the terms of the final communique. It is our intention to continue on the course that we have set for ourselves. Obviously, this requires internal stability, both stability of government and stability of political life within Pakistan. Without stability, there can be no weight, no sanction, no clarity, no continuity in our foreign policy. The problems, the basic problems remain. We shall have to face them. Despite the dangers and the threats which loom ahead, we derive confidence in our ability to devise measures to protect our security, to enhance our capability for defense, to forge sentiments of political solidarity so that we do not stand alone. The present and the future open new vistas to us. We have shaken away the inhibitions and the psychology of dependence, we can reach our full stature. And as world developments permit, not only react to world events, but in the words of President Ayub, to create events, to shape history as great nations have done. Thank you.